The National Council of Teachers of Mathematics welcomes you to Adding It All Up, a podcast created by and for mathematics educators and teachers. Join us each month as we explore current topics, insights, and emerging trends with thought leaders in the math community. And now, the hosts of Adding It All Up, NCTM President Latrenda Knighten and NCTM Past President Kevin Dykema.
Welcome back to another episode of Adding It All Up. I'm Kevin Dykema. As you know, I have Latrenda Knighten with me, who's the current president of NCTM. Can you believe we're already in 2025? Time has flown by. And when we think back to 2024, it was a year full of changes and growth in mathematics education. It feels like we've seen so much innovation and new thinking in the last year. So Latrenda, as we reflect back on 2024, what do you think was the most impactful development or achievement in mathematics education?
So that's a powerful question, Kevin. And as I think about 2024, something that was impactful for me, and hopefully it was for others as well, was the actual growth in the interest and the acceptance of data science. And I say this because for years, NCTM has been on the cutting edge of realizing the growth in that area and how important it is that our students are connoisseurs of data. But from my perspective, with the number of years I've spent in elementary grades, this is the first time I've actually saw an uptick in interest in understanding how important it is for young children to have data literacy. And I say this because there were several requests from media outlets where we participated in interviews. And I didn't just want to talk about data science and how it's a growing career and how we needed to provide a workforce in that area. They actually wanted to talk about why is it important that we have data literacy in the elementary grades. And that gave me just a lot of hope that people are listening and they're paying attention and they're thinking about how important that is. And something else that I observed in that area is that we participate, as you guys know, in the Mathical Book Prize. And several of the new children's book publications were focusing on data literacy. And so that's the first time I've seen children's authors embracing, something like that and actually trying to make sure that we're putting things out there for our students and our teachers on that topic. So that was very impactful for me. So what about you, Kevin?
Yeah, I love that focus, Latrenda, that you had about meeting the needs of students and recognizing that the mathematics of 30, 40 years ago shouldn't necessarily be the mathematics of today. So when I think back over the last year, I think it's really this notion of high school mathematics pathways are really coming to the forefront. It's not a new thing from 2024. It's been around for a number of years. But I really am so encouraged by the number of conversations that school districts, that states are having about what do we do to better meet the needs of all of our students, in this case, those high school students, recognizing that we need to have pathways that are around their interests. Think to our colleagues in other content areas. They have lots of choices for their senior year, junior year sometimes, for science, for language arts, for history, social studies. But then it gets to be math, and traditionally we have not offered choices. We pushed everything down this pathway to calculus. And calculus is very, very important for many. It's very, very useful for many, but not for all. And I love this push to have interest-driven data science pathway, an interest-driven quantitative reasoning pathway. We're recognizing that not all students need the same thing in order to be successful in that post-secondary space. So I love that there's just this focus on whether it's thinking about data science and data literacy K-12, whether it's thinking about high school mathematics pathways, that we're really focusing on what do students need. And that gets me so encouraging, gets me so fired up, and keeps me wanting to continue to push all of us forward, myself included, on what are we doing to better meet the needs of all of our students.
Thank you, Kevin, for sharing that. It is really exciting to see the focus on the student and students' interests. And with so many exciting developments on the horizon, that are making us think about our students and really making that math space about them growing and learning and seeing themselves as learners and doers of mathematics. I think it's going to be a little bit fun for this hour to go back and look at some of those key things in math education and some things that NCTM has been involved in over the last year. So before we jump in and start reminiscing about all the great and wonderful things that have happened, we have Jamie Lorenz with us today, and she is our fabulous NCTM's Classroom Resources Manager who's going to guide us through this conversation. So, Jamie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to look back on 2024 with the two of you. So, there's been so much happening this year in math education and at NCTM. It's going to be really hard to narrow it down to just a few things. But this past year, NCTM released a variety of new publications. We collaborated with NCTE for a joint conference celebrating the intersection of math and literacy. We brought together a community in Seattle and Chicago for the regional and annual conferences, just to name a few. And we can't forget that we even launched this podcast. So it's hard to believe that this is already our 10th episode. So, with all that, what stands out to you as the most memorable accomplishment that NCTM made in 2024?
I think for me, it was the release of High School Mathematics Reimagined. That as a council, as a broader mathematics education community, looking at our partners from the folks at NCSM and ASSM, what's needed in that high school space to really push the field forward? What's needed to reimagine, to reinvigorate, to revitalize the high school mathematics? And to think deeply about the content, the experiences that students need, those pathways again. And I think that's a very powerful document. And I think we're going to continue to see the impact of it in the upcoming year. So I think that's one of the most memorable accomplishments from NCTM, in my eyes at least.
I would definitely agree with that, Kevin. And then one of the things that I would also add to it was the joint conference with NCTE. This was the first time that we hosted this conference. And it's the first time that we actually tailored something to the audience of just the elementary teacher. And this was one of the much needed collaborations for teachers, for teacher leaders, and for us as those leaders for content area for NCTE and for NCTM, because it brought our teachers who are at the foundation of when we think about our students trajectory for learning, and we brought our teachers who actually help our students get started on their learning journey, and we focused on them, and we gave them an opportunity to come together to provide professional development, to network, to learn from and with each other, just in that collaborative space where they were able to just have elementary focus. One of the neat things that came out of that was the teachers and the leaders thought really hard about how do these two content areas actually intersect. And so just the collaborations and them showing the connections so that we actually are helping our students not see math in isolation. Math classes from 9 to 10, and after that, you don't think about math anymore. Teachers really thought about math is everywhere. So, how do we see how we can encourage literacy in the math space? But at the same times, I saw our literacy partners thinking very hard to think about how can we actually uplift and help our students build their numeracy in the literacy space. And so I saw that opportunity as a gift to our members to give them the opportunity to have that space to learn and collaborate with each other. And of course, we will be having a second conference as well. And I am so excited that we decided to be the pioneers in that space as far as our content area and the literacy folks to offer something like that to our elementary teachers, where they got to think about the two almost most important content areas that they teach each day and putting them together and having an opportunity for them just to learn with each other in that space.
So, as we mentioned a little bit ago, and Latrenda just touched on one of the conferences too, NCTM has hosted conferences across the country, including a regional conference in Seattle, a virtual conference, a joint conference with NCTE in New Orleans, the annual conference in Chicago, and interactive institutes in Nashville and Las Vegas. So these events provided incredible opportunities for connecting, learning, and collaborating with educators, researchers, administrators, and other members of the math education community. So how do these events help build and strengthen that math education community?
Yeah, one of the things that when I go to conferences or other events hosted by NCTM or other organizations, one of the things that always strikes me is the energy that's there. When I was in Nashville, when I was in New Orleans, when I was in Seattle, when I was in Chicago, just the buzz in the hallways, the buzz in the exhibit area, the buzz in there. It's other people who are passionate about mathematics education, who are extremely passionate about meeting the needs of all of our students. And I think that helps to build that community. I think when we're in our own isolated situation, we forget that there are other people who are just as passionate about meeting the needs of students and looking at doing things differently. Sometimes, for some of us in our settings, we're around folks who are a little bit more resistant to making change or who may not want to have a list of 20 math education books to read and 15 math education webinars to watch. That sometimes we feel like we're the only one in our area who has this strong passion to continually grow and to learn new things. But when we go to an NCTM event, we recognize, oh, I'm not a unicorn. There are lots of other people in that same boat who want to continue to do that. And I think it just builds that community. It's a space where you meet friends from all over the nation and all over the world. And for some, those NCTM events are the one time a year, the 2 times a year that you actually get to meet in person. I love meeting the people in real life instead of just on the Brady Bunch Zoom screen. And there's a lot of people that you make connections with, but it's that face-to-face interaction that's so helpful in building that math education community. The ability to network and to find other people who have similar interests as you and just to energize you as you go back into your workspace and then be able to make connections throughout the year with those folks.
I'm always so blown away at these conferences with how passionate our community is about math education and about putting their students at the forefront. So what do you think, Latrenda, makes these conferences so effective in fostering collaboration and professional growth?
One of the things I would say, piggybacking on some of the things that Kevin said, just about like these are our people. So many of us, when we're looking forward, we're getting ready to go to one of the conferences, we're posting on social media, I'm getting ready to see my peeps. Because for me, it was the one time of year when I knew I was going to be surrounded by people who were just as passionate about math education and about learning innovative and effective strategies for supporting teachers or supporting our students as well.
Years ago, and they continue to do great things together ever since. So, yeah, that lasting friendship. In 2024, NCTM released several publications, including the Principles to Action's 10th Anniversary Edition, the Impact of Identity Expanded Edition, the High Yield Routines 2nd Edition, High School Reimagined, Modern Math Tasks Grades 3-5, and Go-To Guides for our Essential Understanding series. These resources have offered new insights, practical strategies, and creative approaches to support math educators at all levels. How do you see these new resources supporting educators in their classrooms?
Well, from my perspective, I can honestly tell you that was the gift that kept on giving for me. Because one of the things that I feel that NCTM does well is publish high quality resources for mathematics educators to support them in their work. And I do see that as a support because I feel as if we do a really good job of we have those things that talk about the research that tells why we should do these things, but it also tells me as a practitioner, how do I put those pieces into action? How do I make that come alive in the classroom? And then having the interactive components where sometimes there's some things where I have a MTLT article that later will come that will support a publication. Sometimes there's webinars to support that, and also even sometimes a book study. One of the reasons why I think those new resources have been very supportive is because I think many of us know that over time, one of the things that schools don't receive is additional funding for a lot of things. So when you don't have that additional funding, usually one of the first things that is eliminated from the school budget are those professional development opportunities, especially those content specific ones. So having high quality resources that are focused on making sure that students are getting that high quality instructional experience really provides our members with an opportunity to continue that growth and having the additional pieces that we have that allow you to actually interact, usually in a virtual environment. And then when you come to a face to face conference, you can't have that in person interaction. It really allows you as an educator to remain current with mathematics education, to have a place where you can think about what are those research aligned practices and strategies, what could it look like, what should it look like in the classroom, and just the new resources that we did this year. What I really like that we went back and did the go-to guides for the Essential Understanding series, because I loved that series as a classroom teacher. I loved it as a coach. But I also know from working with teachers, being a coach and working at the district level, that sometimes you need to have something that helps people hone in on just those pieces. How do I use this as a resource? How do I use this as a tool? And so I've seen people really excited about having that because some people were familiar with that resource, some people weren't, but this gave them some guidance and some structure of how to use those as a tool to support their work in the classroom. So I really did enjoy the impact that I saw that having, especially on teachers around my area and my former district.
So, Kevin, how do you think these publications contribute to NCTM's overall mission and vision for math education?
Yeah, so I just want to echo Latrenda's practicality part. When I think about NCTM's publications, I really see them as a blend. There's some of the documents that are really setting the vision for what mathematics education should look like. When I think about High School Mathematics Reimagined, that's setting a vision. When I think about Catalyzing Change series, that's setting the vision. But then NCTM also releases books that are really about implementing those. I think about Principles to Actions. That's a landmark document, but it's really about what can we do in that classroom? What can it look like? I think about some of the other ones, that Taking Action series. I think about the high yield routines, the impact of identity. So not only is NCTM looking at setting the vision for mathematics education, and one of the most powerful parts I think about our mission statement is that each and every student. What are we doing to help meet the needs of all of our students, and not just to meet the needs of the next generation of STEM professions, but what are we doing to meet the needs of every single student? So I love this notion of what can we do setting that vision, as well as how do we implement that vision, and really keeping that laser-like focus on what are we doing to continually increase and make more mathematics available for more of our students. As I talk with members over the last few years, I hear many positive things from our members about the publications. That it's a trusted source. People recognize, hey, when NCTM has something to say, it's worthwhile to read. As I've gone into a variety of meetings, I know Latrenda has had that same experience. Other organizations, other groups of people are looking to NCTM for what should mathematics education look like. Latrenda talked a little bit ago about some media outlets that contact NCTM for it. And some of it's because of some of the publications that we've done, that it starts to create a buzz out there that they're saying, this is what mathematics education is thinking about. I might need to know that. So I think it's a very, very powerful tool that we have, these publications that continually come out to not only set the vision for what math education should look like, but as well as how do we actually implement it? What does it look like for me as a classroom teacher in trying to meet the needs of those 30 students in front of me at any given point in time.
So, as I said earlier, it's really going to be hard to narrow this down to just a few topics, but I really want to talk about MTLT. It has remained a key resource for math educators, delivering in-depth content, effective strategies, forward-thinking ideas. And last year, MTLT also released several special issues, including the second issue of Build It and an issue on gaining traction with actions, which actually celebrated the 10th anniversary of our Principles to Actions publication. Each issue covers key and timely topics in math education. So, how do the articles and resources in MTLT reflect the evolving priorities and challenges that we see in math education today?
Yeah, it's always amazing to me. Our MTLT editorial team, whether it's the editor, whether it's the supporting editors, it's amazing. Every time I'm out in a different spot and I start to hear a new buzz about something, all of a sudden a month or two later, there's an article in that. And I don't know how they are able to stay so on top of all the current trends and the emerging issues. And I hear a place talking about, oh, we need help with multilingual learners. And then 2 months later, there's an article about multilingual learners. So it's amazing how in tune our editorial panel is with the issues that are happening in mathematics education. I think people look at MTLT, it's a shorter commitment than attending a webinar about that. And I love that MTLT is really focusing in on those cover articles about the PK to 12. And I think so often, I taught eighth grade for over 26 years before I became president elect. I know eighth grade math, but it wasn't until this year when I started to do some instructional coaching in my district that as I'm going into other classes, I'm like, oh, I didn't know that sixth graders really started to learn some of this stuff. And sometimes I would think it was brand new in eighth grade and treated it as brand new. So I love that MTLT is forcing us, encouraging us, pushing us, prodding us, whatever word we want to use, to think PK to 12. And while the content is going to look different at that early elementary versus the middle versus the high school, the ways that we interact may be similar with that. And we just need to have a heightened awareness of how are our students learning in the earlier grades? How are they learning in those later grades? What are some of the experiences that they are having, and how does it look different in a second grade classroom versus a fifth grade classroom and then an eighth grade classroom? But we all have that same mission. We're all looking at what do we do to meet the needs of every single one of those learners in front of us? What are we doing to increase the amount of mathematics opportunities for more and more of our students? So I just love when the MTLT comes, and it's always a relevant topic, something that I'm thinking about, and it's provided opportunities to have some great conversations with people through around the nation about, hey, did you read that article? What are you thinking about with that?
So, Latrenda, thinking about all of the different components of MTLT, what kind of impact do you think it has on teachers, especially those looking for resources and inspiration?
So, one of the things I would definitely say, Kevin mentioned it about having MTLT articles give you an awareness of what happens beyond your particular bubble or space. And so I can speak personally. I remember when we had our legacy journals. As a teacher, I subscribed to just the elementary journal because my funds were limited. So I wasn't one of the people who had the expanded membership where I received the elementary, the middle school, and the high school journal. What I love about MTLT, because it does focus on that pre K 12 space, and many times it does provide you with an opportunity to look at an idea, a topic, or a content area along a grade level progressions. I think that's one of the biggest impacts I've seen that MTLT has had on the teaching profession, because as a teacher and as someone who's worked as a coach, I'm always saying we have to be aware of not just our bubble. I need to know what happens before they come to me, what happens afterwards, and I need to be able to help put those pieces together. So I would say one of the lasting impacts for teachers is being able to have access to that information. And even if it's not one article that actually span several progressions, Within that journal, I have access to those articles that open the window for me to see what's happening in the other areas. Because many times, if I'm on an elementary campus, I may not get to talk to someone on a middle school campus. Same thing with middle school and high school. So now look at the impact we're having on teachers that have access to that information. So now you've got the resources available, because I always tell teachers that kids don't walk into fourth grade with a fourth grade stamp on their head and that's where they are and that's the only place they sit. You may have a student who comes in who's a fourth grader who may need some scaffolding from a previous grade, but you may have a fourth grader who walks in who needs some things that's in the sixth grade curriculum. So having access to those resources, and what I love, as Kevin mentioned, it's just a short article. It's not the same as reading an entire book, but because they're grounded in research, so I've got research, I've got pedagogy, now I've got some guidance of how I can take this idea and how I can use it to support the students that I support, to support those families. And sometimes I've seen teachers see something that was in an article and think, you know what? I think I could do this. I can get inspired by this. And I can honestly say that probably about 6 months ago, we had an issue where it was data literacy, but it was pre K. And even though I am an early childhood trained teacher, I've always been afraid to teach pre K. Venturing into the world of teaching 4-year olds, I was so impressed by the work that the authors had done in their classrooms and the things that they shared, those investigations, that I was like, I've got to go do this in someone else's classroom now because I no longer have a classroom. And so I was inspired as a 30 plus year educator by seeing this article and seeing how someone showed me how you could do this with 4-year olds. So I think a lot of people probably get that, just that boost of, okay, there's another way I can do this, and I'm going to try this. And then having those discussions with other folks so we can try this together. So I'm constantly just inspired by the different things that people share and the ideas that they talk about that they're using in their classrooms, and just having the concrete resources that are shared where I actually have something to use to start to share that process or try to do this with a group of students or even bring that information to a group of teachers. So that is something that was really impactful. And if I could share one more thing, one thing that I really love that happened this year is we did a crossover, a journal article or journal issue with Science and Children. So we partnered with NSTA, and I was so impressed with that partnership that we did and how we showed that intersection with math and science and STEM just across our journals. And now I do love math and science. So, of course, it just fed my soul. But it was a wonderful partnership. And I just kept thinking, for those teachers, and not just elementary teachers who teach multiple content areas, I know a lot of people, especially early career high school teachers, who have multiple preps, who may have algebra 1, but they may have physical science as well. So some of them are diving into math and science just because there's a new person on the campus. So they get those multiple preps. I just thought, what a gift that we gave this to our membership. And because we do pre K 12, our articles actually span the entire pre K 12 spectrum. For those people who are members of NSTA, you do know that Science and Children is the elementary journal for NSTA, but we were able to tackle that topic across the pre K 12 spectrum because our journal is pre K 12. So that was one of my favorite issues from this past year, was the crossover joint issue.
And what I love about MTLT is that many of the authors are teacher authors. And so we have teachers sharing what they're actually doing and seeing in their classroom and what they've had success with and sharing it with our community. So moving along, NCTM has always been thought as a leader and advocate for the field of math education. And it feels like 2024 was a big year for us in these areas. I thought it'd be great to talk through some of the big highlights, including our position statements, representation at the International Congress on Mathematical Education, our advocacy efforts on Capitol Hill, and of course, the ongoing High School Reimagine initiative and what's next. So NCTM has really increased its output of position statements over the past couple of years, and that trend seems to be continuing. So can you help us understand why these statements are so important and maybe highlight a few key ones that have been released recently and share with us maybe a sense of what's on the horizon?
So when I think about our position statements, I can't help but think about my experience as a teacher who earlier Kevin alluded to a unicorn, and there were many campuses that I worked on that I was a unicorn. And especially when I became an instructional coach for math. What I love about our position statements is they provide our membership with ideas or guidance on a particular issue or topic. Why is this important in math education? But it's grounded in research. So, of course, you've got some things that tell this is what the issue is, that is why, this is some research to support it. And what I love is that it just gives you just that, a position statement. So it's a short one pager, usually maybe 1.5 to 2 pages, that gives you some ideas about this topic, this issue, why it is important. Here are a couple ideas, that a couple bullet points that you can use to tell why this is important. What does it look like? What could it look like? And sometimes maybe next steps. And then, of course, it's supported by having those resources and those references that you can use if you want to learn a little bit more about that topic, or just to have those pieces to support. Why is this so important? As a classroom teacher, it is important. All teachers want to do things that are purposeful, they want to do things that are intentional, because we are there to support and make sure that our students have the high quality education experience. We really want to provide that for all of our students. So it's important for me as an educator to know what is the research behind why I'm doing this, and be able to have a way to articulate it. Sometimes it's like, I know this is important. I know why I need to do this because I have evidence of what I've seen in my classroom, but they just need a little bit of support. Or how do I very concisely articulate this to my parents, to my administrator, of why this is something that's important to do in our classrooms. So I see that we give them a service by having that resource and that tool to help put it in a concise way so that they can communicate it to others. But also, it becomes a resource that you can use if you're that grade level chair or you're supporting math on your campus. You can share with your colleagues or with others to help them to learn more about it. And every now and then, if there's someone who's like, well, I just don't see why your students should be having more opportunities to do this, come in your room. Your kids are doing all the talking. Seems a little bit noisy in here, Latrenda. And so I can pull out a position statement that talks about the importance of giving students voice, the importance of students having discourse, and that students actually being people who are talking, and how I'm facilitating. And so it helps give a point. As a coach, these were almost like golden for me because I had minimal amount of time to have that face-to-face time in front of my teachers to talk about an important topic. So having a position statement gave me a very short piece of reading for them. And so we could go through it. They actually didn't have to read a full journal article. They didn't have to read a full book, but then they've got some concrete examples of what could this look like in the classroom and why. And then many times it sparked a further discussion. So now we may actually use this as a problem of practice that we'll explore on our campus. But it really helps give you those talking points. Some of the ones that I think all the ones we released in this past year, folks have been extremely excited about. But one that really surprised me is how many folks were so excited about our data science position statement, the joint one, because it addressed multiple content areas. And so it looked at the K 12. Now, we did have one that was data science that focused on high school. But there were so many people who actually start to think differently about that topic because of that. I would say that our position statement on AI was very forward thinking because we were the first content area to actually put out a position statement on AI. And so people were appreciative. It was the elephant in the room that some people didn't want to talk about, but we needed to talk about because our kids are using it, our kids know about it, and we need to actually embrace it and think about what are responsible ways to actually bring this into that classroom space. And so I thought that was a great service that we did for math educators by actually addressing it's here, giving them some tangible ideas. And from there, we've seen a growth. So many people are now looking to find what are some other things I can do in this area? How can I embrace it? And how can I support my colleagues? So we're even seeing sessions crop up at our upcoming conferences on this topic because people are actively thinking about how can we make sure that we use this responsibly and in a way that's going to support students in their learning. So now this is something that's becoming an area for professional learning for our teachers as well, because they're thinking about, okay, this is something I can think about. This is something that I can do. So I think those are some things that stood out to me this year when I thought about just some of the position statements that were introduced. We've had so many.
I know we've supported visits to Capitol Hill during our annual meeting in DC, and we've also been working with board members on visits to members of Congress. Kevin, can you share more about what this work looks like and why it's such an important part of the council's efforts?
Yeah, I think it's so important that the council has that public voice and that we're continually advocating. Latrenda talked about the position statements, but I think it's taking those position statements and what are we doing with those position statements? They're not just there for our members. They're there to help educate our non-members, to educate the general public. When I think about going to Capitol Hill and why it's so powerful, part of our job is just working with the staffers there and educating them about what math education should look like. The numerous times I've been on Capitol Hill, I don't think I've ever met with a senator or a representative. It's always been with his or her staff members. And the staff members are generally in their 20s. They don't have that breadth of knowledge that somebody who's been in math education for a long time. And for many of them, their portfolio may be education, workforce, it could be climate, it could be, I mean, they have so many things that they're focusing in on. So somebody has to be doing some education of them. And I think part of the work that we need to continue to do as a council is to help educate those lawmakers, educate those policymakers about why change is needed. What could those changes look like? And I think that's where those position statements are so helpful. We'll try to point it out. They're short, sweet, to the point. We're not asking them to read 4 pages. We're not asking them to read 20 pages. It's a one-page document. So I think it's so incredibly helpful to do that. I'm also always struck every time I've been on Capitol Hill, the number of other professional organizations that are there advocating for dollars, advocating for resources. So if we're not there, they're not hearing our voice. The money is likely to go other places. We need to be having our voice there as well. When I think about those position statements, they're helpful for our Capitol Hill advocacy work, but I also think about the impact they have internationally. This past summer in 2024, I had the opportunity to go to the International Congress of Mathematics Education. Some people know it as ICME. It happened to be in Sydney, Australia. And our position statements were referenced in other people's talks. As I networked with people from around the world, they look to NCTM for that leadership in there. And there are other nations that are saying, oh, if this is what NCTM is saying should happen, what we should be thinking about, we in our own areas need to be thinking about that as well. So I just think those position statements have such a powerful impact in so many different spots throughout the nation and throughout the world.
Well, thank you both for taking the time just to reflect on 2024. I know we could probably talk all day, but what's on the horizon for NCTM in 2025? What exciting initiatives, events, or resources should NCTM members and the math education community be looking forward to in the next year?
Definitely a continuation of the wonderful things that we have been putting in place over last year, because we will continue to focus on those member driven ideas for publications, as well as our professional learning opportunities with our conferences and our institutes. But I would like to share something that's on the horizon. We've mentioned several times one of our publications from 2024 was High School Mathematics Reimagined, Revitalized, and Relevant. And so that was very important that that publication was released at the time that it was. But we also began to see the opportunity to make those connections between some of the things that we introduced in that publication with the entire pre K 12 progression. And so we do have a new publication. It won't be 2025, it will be 2026 when it will be released. But you'll be hearing a lot about it this year because we're working on a pre K 12 focal points document where we're looking at that entire pre K 12 spectrum, thinking about what's important in each of those grade levels, those grade bands. And this really gives us an opportunity to look at that coherence across pre K 12, look at making those connections as we've touched upon and a lot of other things we've talked about. So as we introduce cross-cutting concepts and mathematical and statistical processes in High School Mathematics Reimagined, you're going to see us now connect those to pre-K 8. So now we'll see what that looks like from pre-K all the way through the high school spectrum. So now, once again, just like MTLT brings everybody together around pre-K 12, we're going to have this unifying publication that helps bring those pieces together. And that's just going to help with us providing students with opportunities to make sense of mathematics and make connections as they move from one grade level, one grade band to the next, I think. So hopefully people are going to be waiting on pins and needles as they wait for that publication.
Yeah, that'll be a great publication that comes out in 2026. We just finished up a wonderful spring conference in Kansas City, and I'm looking forward to our annual meeting in October. Latrenda mentioned earlier the joint conference number 2 with NCTE that'll be held in Chicago in June. Looking forward to that as well. Our virtual conference is right around the corner. In addition to the work that's happening with this curriculum focal points, there's lots of other publications that are coming out in this next year. I don't want to spoil the excitement that's coming out and butcher any of the names, but there are some of them that are continuations of existing work. I'm really excited to see some of the new powerful mathematicians who changed the world book. I'm excited for our book studies around High School Mathematics Reimagined, our book studies around the coaching book, the continuing to think about what can we do to help meet the needs of all of our members and meet the needs of our students. I think about this podcast. I'm looking forward to seeing where this podcast is going in the next year and who some of our guests are going to be, as we just provide another way to share the good news about mathematics education. And speaking of that podcast, this is starting to wrap us up here. Thanks to our listeners for joining in today and listening to this episode of Adding It All Up. Thanks to Jamie for sort of turning the tables on Latrenda and I and facilitating the conversation and letting Latrenda and I talk a lot more than what we normally do in a podcast. So thanks, Jamie, for your efforts today. And more importantly, thanks, Jamie, for your efforts in making this podcast happen on a monthly basis and finding such wonderful guests for us. I'm looking forward to next month when we chat with authors from MTLT from the Front and Center article that'll be in that March issue around building students' cognitive toolboxes. And I look forward to learning with all of you next month. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Adding It All Up. At NCTM, we strive to bring you the biggest topics happening in mathematics. Join us next month for another exciting discussion.